Stochastic terrorism refers to the use of public communication to incite violence, often against a particular individual or group, while maintaining plausible deniability about their direct involvement. It's a phenomenon that blurs the lines between words and actions, where dangerous rhetoric becomes a catalyst for real-world harm. And tonight, on episode 117 of the Political Mic podcast, I bring to you a story that embodies the very essence of this term. In a world that has seen the rise of extreme ideologies, the erosion of civil discourse, and the fracturing of communities, there's one journalist who stands at the front lines, fearlessly wielding the power of the pen against the rising tide of hostility. Buckle up as I introduce you to a remarkable woman whose dedication to the truth has transformed her into a symbol of unwavering courage in the face of adversity. Imagine a place where the very act of seeking the truth can make you a target of threats, where reporting the news can place you in the crosshairs of anger and hatred. Welcome to Shasta County, California, where journalist Doni Chamberlain has spent nearly 3 decades documenting the twists and turns of a community caught in the throes of a political earthquake. Before the tumultuous era of the Trump presidency, before COVID-19 changed the world, before the 2020 election shook the nation, Miss Chamberlain would occasionally receive calls from disgruntled readers who disagreed with her columns. They'd vent their frustrations with heated words. But today, in the eye of a storm driven by far-right fervor, those disagreements have transformed into something much darker. Now, critics brandish words like communists and hurl threats so vile that the very foundations of journalism are shaken. Imagine walking a tightrope between duty and danger as a journalist takes precautions to protect herself from a rising tide of hostility. This brave woman, Miss Chamberlain, has learned to live stream events where hostility simmers, never meeting sources in public and scanning streets for shadows. A chilling reality where even restraining orders become tools for survival. And why, you might ask? Because this journalist, Doni Chamberlain, has been witnessing a transformation unlike any other. Shasta County has become a battleground for different factions of the far right, uniting in an unholy alliance with a single-minded goal: power. An American flag flutters in the wind, overlooking a river and green hills where the foundation of democracy shake under the weight of extremism. Brace yourselves tonight for a tale of a community's descent into the depths of the far right, a place where once moderate public officials now face bullying, intimidation, and the chilling specter of violence. Doni Chamberlain's news site, A News Cafe, has fearlessly captured the dramatic unraveling of Shasta County's political landscape. Her writing has painted a target on her back, making her the enemy of a conservative crowd set on reshaping an entire county. But what sets Miss Chamberlain apart is her unyielding determination. She's not just a reporter, she's a beacon of truth, fighting to expose the extremism that threatens to engulf her community. With every word she writes, she sounds the alarm, warning us all that what's happening in Shasta County could echo far beyond its borders. Ms. Chamberlain, thank you so much for being a part of the Political Mic tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Ms. Chamberlain, your experiences as a journalist in Shasta County over the past 30 years have been quite unique. Could you tell us more about the attitude towards the press and how it has changed from receiving occasional displeased calls to now facing accusations of being a communist and even threats of violence?
There's been a stark change in the 30 years that I've been a journalist. In the beginning, when I worked at the paper, as you mentioned, we would get letters to the editor or phone calls, and you could go to a public meeting and there would be people who disagreed, but there was decorum and people could live next door to somebody who wasn't the same political party, but they could still get along. And then since I'd say in the last 3.5 years, I think COVID was kind of the trigger, or it kind of opened the floodgates of this sort of extremism here in Shasta County and across the world. Actually, since then, I've received multiple death threats. I just submitted a restraining order recently for somebody who had a radio show and called for my public execution in a Nuremberg trial. And I should be hanged by my neck, dragged behind a car, because that's the only way that socialists and communists and Marxists like me will learn. So things have changed a lot. I mean, drastic change. And to be a journalist, we can talk about it more a little later, but I I was assaulted on July 6th, and I'm still recovering. I actually wrote the first story in almost 2 months, which I put up yesterday. I'm kind of off my game. I had a concussion and a whiplash, and I'm still in recovery over that.
I'm so terribly sorry to hear
Thanks.
about that incident, Miss Chamberlain. Was that incident inspired directly by that radio host?
No, this is a whole different group. This is a group that was, it was an event. I'm sorry, because of my concussion, my brain is a little scrambled, so I speak more haltingly than I usually do. But this was a meeting that was arranged by one of the militia members here in Shasta County. His name is Jesse Lane, and it was supposed to be an event where all the patriots got together, and because after the George Floyd peaceful protest in Redding, California, where there were more militia people and friends of militia than there were protesters, he was complaining that they need to go back to that unity. So that was what this meeting was about. It was public. It was on Facebook. It said all patriots, business owners, community members. And so I went, and I knew I would probably be unwelcome there. I was the only media there, which often happens in meetings where the average person might be afraid to go there, or they feel unwelcome or out of place. So what I've been doing for the last few years is going places where people are afraid to go. And I'll kind of joke, like, I go there so you don't have to. I was asked to leave, and I stood my ground and stood back center against a wall. I was streaming live Facebook the whole time until this one of the guys in the movement, his name is Mark Kent, who weighs 350 pounds if he weighs an ounce, came up and toe to toe and grabbed my camera phone, and which was attached to a strap around my neck. And basically I was being hanged and jerked up by my own camera strap, which couldn't be released because it was attached to my neck and my head. And that's how I got the concussion and whiplash. Then they encircled me. I was like the whole of a human donut, at least 5. I couldn't see who was behind me, and they would have not allowed, they put their hands in front of my camera, in front of my face. The meeting is going on the whole time. They did a prayer and a flag salute. During the prayer, somebody asked for Doni Chamberlain's salvation. So this meeting was going on while this was happening, and I was captured and trapped in this circle for 23 minutes. And eventually they called 911, and 3 sheriff vehicles showed up and 4 deputies escorted me out of the building. And I later learned that had I stood my ground, because I was embarrassed that I didn't later, I was angry at myself. And I told one of the deputies, you know what, I wish I had not complied. I wish that I had not gone with you outside as you asked. I wish that I had just stayed and stood my ground because I had a right to be there. And he said, well, if you had, we would have put you in one of our cruisers, and you would have been arrested, taken to the Shasta County jail and arrested. So that's where it happened. And I went to the emergency room, and I've had treatment, and it rocked my world because all the time, for some ridiculous reason, I thought I was somewhat protected as a journalist. I could stand in the most raucous, rowdy place with my notebook and a recorder and a pen and just be quiet. I'm not there to be the news. I'm there to report the news. And I thought I was somehow protected, that attacking a journalist was off limits. Since July 6th, that's really changed how I see things and view things, because this man who assaulted me and this group, after I was escorted out of the building, I saw a video of the meeting, and he was hailed as a hero. People applauded him, shaking his hand, high fives, hand grasps, way to go. And when he introduced himself at the panel at this meeting, he said, my name is Mark Kent. I guess I'm a little bit of a hothead. And everybody laughed. So there were 200 people there. And so the tide has turned. Not one person there came to my defense. And that's sobering. It isn't just one guy. There are many, many people who share his methods and his mindset.
You have to go back to 1988 to see when California was in the Republican column on a presidential level.
Mm-hmm.
How did Shasta County's political landscape shift dramatically over the past years, leading to a rise in far-right factions? How would you describe the key elements that have contributed to this political transformation?
Well, I think when I grew up in Shasta County in the 60s and the 70s, it was blue collar and Democrats, because we had mills here. We had, paper mills and lumber mills and a lot of jobs that were union jobs. And so there were more people who leaned more toward the Democrat side, because Democrats protect those, unions and groups like that. And then there was the environmental breakdown here and the spotted owl controversy, and the mills all closed down and all those jobs went away. And then Shasta County became more of a place where retirees would come. We're surrounded by natural beauty, lakes and rivers and streams and mountains. And it's a, nice place to retire. And a lot of those retirees came from Southern California and Orange County, and they were Republicans. And that wasn't so bad. You could feel the shift here. And then there are, the elections changed. Before there would be a board or a city council with a mix of people, Democrats and Republicans. And then eventually it just got farther and farther to the right, not extremist right, but just Republicans. So for example, on the current Board of Supervisors, I don't remember, it's been decades since there was a Democrat on the Board of Supervisors. However, up until recently, they had been what I would consider sane, regular, moderate Republicans. And then in the last couple of years, that has changed. We are now ruled by an extremist alt-right majority who are just wreaking havoc. They've gotten rid of our Dominion voting machines. They want to just do hand count. They've disenfranchised Shasta County voters because we currently have no means in place for an election. They push, Second Amendment gun rights. They want to do open carry. They fired our completely irrational health officer during COVID simply for doing her job. In the state of California, she took an oath to, follow the mandates of California. And she actually did an awesome job in a place where people were pushing back. There have been a lot of data about Shasta County was one of the counties, I think one of the few counties in California where economically we thrived during the pandemic. And people say that proudly, like the, Chamber of Commerce. And I push back and say, do you know why that is? It's because there was so little compliance here. So businesses stayed open. People didn't wear masks. They didn't want to. You could see a division down the middle between stores and businesses that would try to enforce it. And these guys would storm the stores, yell, bring in their flags, intimidate people. I noticed that some of the most compliant businesses, restaurants and things, were those owned and operated by immigrants. Mexican restaurants, Chinese restaurants, Thai restaurants. They complied with the government rules, but the burger places, the steak places, the local places, they thumbed their nose at the mandates and at our governor and didn't comply.
Your reporting has covered the rise of an ultra-conservative coalition backed by militia members,
yes,
anti-vaxxers, and election deniers.
Yes.
Can you share with us some of the turning points or events that marked the emergence of this coalition's influence?
Well, I mentioned the George Floyd protest, and that was right after George Floyd's murder. And that was the first time that I saw the militia out in force. I mean, I grew up here. I'd hear talk about militia, kind of secret stuff, that guys that would go out in the woods and practice with their weapons, paramilitary gear, which is illegal, by the way. And I'd never seen them out in force like that. And to me, I called that the militia's coming out party in Shasta County. And then some militia members went on to form this organization called Red, White, and Blueprint. And they did a docu-series. We covered every single, I have one reporter, journalist, R.V. Scheid, who reviews every one of these documentaries. And they were pushing for Shasta County to become the, quote, blueprint for how other counties across the country could emulate what's happening here, and they too could become this alt-right haven. And then what's happened is we've had a brain drain here. So a lot of rational people, you see it on Facebook all the time. Hey, you guys, I can't stand it. I'm leaving. And I'm like, don't go, because every time someone leaves like that, then the floodgates are opening for people around the country who look at Shasta County as the place to be, the place to raise their children without any, any push for vaccines. The health officer who was fired by the extremist board, we haven't had a health officer for 400 and something days. And I'm afraid that the person they replace her with will be somebody who's not even a physician, because this board basically had an agenda item where they said you didn't have to be a physician to be a health officer here in Shasta County. So that dumbed down the requirements. So people who believe like this kind of militia-led alt-right group, I wish I had a different name for them. And I don't know if you've heard, I created a moniker a couple of years ago called Shasta Taliban. And the Shasta Taliban is basically a conglomeration of all these different factions: the militia, the Christian nationalists, the Proud Boys, the racists, all these people, because there isn't one name, because they say that they agree on about 80% of the same philosophies and concepts, but there's about 20% they're not in agreement with. So anyway, I call that group overall the Shasta Taliban, to kind of describe the entire group, because what they all agree on, and many of them are Trump supporters, many, you see lots of, Make America Great hats around here and Trump 2024 flags. What they all have in common, aside from the majority being in favor of Trump, is they want freedom and liberty. When they do the Pledge of Allegiance at the board meetings, they'll say, freedom and justice for all, and they scream it out, because they want the right to be able to do whatever they damn well please without any interference from the tyranny, I'm putting that in air quotes, of the government intervention at all. That's what they want, to be left alone. They don't need a gun permit. They don't need a building permit. They don't need to follow any mandates about, health and public safety. It's a lot of them I think you'd actually call like more of a libertarian mindset. So that's where we are right now. And it's, I barely recognize this community, and that's why I don't go out in public for interviews. And it doesn't feel like a safe place. I went to a board meeting on Tuesday, and our board chair, he's more like a dictator now, which is so ironic, because in the first few years of this happening, the alt-right people would come in and scream in meetings and yell and do open death threats from the lectern. Things like, bullets are expensive, but ropes are reusable, talking to moderate board members. And so now this dictator, who was part of this group, rules with an iron fist, and he has blatant discrimination. We have Shasta County is very white. And there's one citizen in Shasta County. His name is Nathan Pinckney. He's an African-American. He's a comic. He's a chef. He's an activist. And the chair, Jones, hates Nathan Pinckney, mainly because Nathan has done a lot of, has satirized these guys. He's made fun of them, and they hate him. So twice, Nathan Pinckney has been ordered out of the board chambers, and there's been practically a riot. And then now the chair will say, if anybody speaks out, they're going to be removed. So that means people, if they're watching someone at the lectern calling the left side, the progressive side, the moderate side, communist, you need a psychiatrist, you're crazy, and if people in the crowd make any noise at all, like, hey, or stop that, or, the chair will pound his gavel and he'll single out people. And so that's what happened Tuesday's meeting. You can go on my website, A News Cafe, and I wrote about it, and I have video from it, because the moment that Chair Jones bangs the gavel and says, we're calling for a recess, that's when all hell's breaking loose, and the people watching the meeting online, it goes black. So thank goodness that people like me are there doing a Facebook Live, because otherwise you'd be none the wiser. So that's what it's come to now. People in the crowd, the progressive people, were holding signs saying "point of order," because they thought, okay, we're not allowed to speak, but we can hold up a sign. And the Rosenberg rules of meetings and Robert's rules, and if somebody says from the floor "point of order" or "out of order," or holds up a sign, then the chair is supposed to immediately address that person and take care of whatever that issue is. Or here, there were dozens of people waving these signs. I could hear, it sounded like, I couldn't figure out, I always sit in the front, and I heard this flapping noise like wings. And I turned around and there were all these people shaking these papers saying "point of order, point of order." And the board chair just ignored them and looked away. So you're not allowed. He clearly favors the alt-right side. He allows his people to come up and speak way past the 3-minute mark because he says he's asking them questions. It's completely upside down.
How do you see the dynamics at play that you've witnessed in Shasta County potentially influencing broader political trends beyond the county into the country?
Well, we here in Shasta County, I mean, all across the country, things like this are happening. However, what makes Shasta County special in a negative way is that there is a son of a billionaire named Reverse Anselmo who has been backing these alt-right candidates, and he successfully basically bought positions because they win elections because they have all this money for advertising. So we have a son of a billionaire, Reverse Anselmo, who's trying to take down Shasta County because he has a grudge against them. And then one of our supervisors, Kevin Cry, has actually met with Mike Lindell. He flew on county money back to see Mike Lindell. So we have backing and attention from people who have money. And, money buys ads, it buys allegiances. And so I think the blueprint, the red, white, and blueprint that I talked about earlier, I am sad to say that it is working, because all you have to do is get enough money to back an alt-right extremist candidate who wins because of all the ads, and and all the people are afraid here. So, and you become complacent. So you get a bunch of these people on your boards, your water boards, your city councils, your board of supervisors, your school boards, and then pretty soon you have a majority. And then the same people who might be inclined to run for office or become a candidate, they don't have the stomach for death threats and having, tires slashed or being yelled at or being followed to their cars. There's one of the guys who started Red, White, and Blueprint. His name is Carlos Zapata. He and his buddy Woody Clenendon, who's the head of the Cottonwood Militia, they had a meeting way back when this all started. And they were talking about, they said, "We know your name. We know your dog's name. We know where you live." I mean, basically, there are people in Shasta County who are so afraid. That's another reason why I don't meet people in public for interviews. Nobody wants to be seen with me. Nobody wants to be seen talking to Doni Chamberlain or any of the reporters from a news cafe, because that might make them a target. They see what happens to us, and they're afraid. And a lot of those people, their way of handling the fear is just to leave. And then that leaves more room for the extremists to come in and replace them.
You alluded to some of the precautions that you've had to take.
Mm-hmm.
The restraining order, not going and doing interviews in public, resorting to Facebook Live. Could you elaborate on some of the other precautions that you've had to take to ensure your safety, while also continuing to report in the face of threats and hostility as you've continued your career?
Yeah, well, all those things. My son surrounded my house with cameras. I mean, I have a sign up front, cameras on the premises. I have 2 security gates, one in my front driveway and one in my back by the alley. My property, and I live in the center of Reading. Okay. I live in an old house in the center of Reading. It looks like I'm surrounded by a fortress. And that's because nothing has happened yet, but I'm just taking precautions, mainly so I have peace of mind so I can sleep at night. Also, when I go to meetings, especially a night meeting, I will take Uber there and back. I have a friend who was one of the only progressive to go to one of the alt-right meetings during the campaigns for the upcoming election, and his tires were slashed. And no cameras outside picked it up. It was at a church. We have a lot of religious involvement with that. This is another thing. A lot of these extremist meetings are held in churches, and they pray and they throw out scriptures and they say that Jesus Christ is, on their side. And people like me, and I'm a moderate, really. I am not as far to the left as people think I am. I'm a moderate. People like me don't believe in God or country, or the flag, or I believe in allowing pedophiles to, pedophilia to be normalized. They make incredible claims about me and people like me. And it's like whack-a-mole. They have radio shows. A number of these guys have radio shows. There's one lineup on Sundays on this conservative talk show radio station called KCNR, State of Jefferson, Patriot State of Mind, similar names. And, I try to monitor those as much as I can. I've tried to get other people to monitor them, but people say, you know what? It makes me literally sick to listen to it. I feel like it's so toxic, and I don't want to expose myself to that kind of hatred and vitriol. I just can't stomach it. So they get away with saying things and planning things. And that's why I think it's so important to go to these meetings like the one on July 6th, because one of the things that Jesse Lane, who organized the meeting, said about those splintered factions. Hey, you guys, we're splintered. We need to get together like we were during that protest. By the way, the George Floyd protest, racial equality protest, all those guys were armed. Baseball bats, weapons, concealed weapons. And Woody Clenendon, the head of the Cottonwood Militia, says the only time he's not carrying a loaded weapon is when he's in the shower. And a lot of those people, subscribe to that.
The gentleman who assaulted you, he's still walking around free. Is that correct?
I saw him Tuesday at the supervisors meeting, and I'm a pretty tough cookie, but I was probably 20 feet from him when the room was cleared because of this one person who spoke out and was removed. They did this recess. Mark Kent, I saw him. In fact, I have a picture of him. I didn't point it out when I wrote the story, but observant readers would know that's who he is. So yeah, he's walking around. Nothing has happened. I did a full-on, report. The sheriff's department took my report. The district attorney has my complaint. I'm asking for a criminal investigation. Nothing has happened here. And every time something like this happens, tires are slashed, death threats. Carlos Zapata left a full-on death threat on a guy's answering machine that had like an old-timey caller ID. He was an older gentleman. Carlos Zapata said, I'm going to come after you. I won't use the language. You're a dead man. Nobody can stop me. No cop can stop me. This was all reported to the Reading Police Department and the FBI. I mean, we almost have FBI on speed dial here. And we just keep saying, I hope they're watching. I hope they're listening. I don't know what they're waiting for. So every time something like that happens and there are no consequences, it emboldens them to push it further. So if Mark Kent could get away with jerking my camera strap up, giving me a concussion and whiplash with my own camera, and grab my phone, which is a form of, theft. And if nothing happens, then, and he was applauded as a hero, then people who might want to emulate him and say, I like it. Look he was in the limelight. He was called a hero. That encourages the even crazier people to follow suit. And that's the scary part. If we had more consequences for the negative things that are happening here, then I think it would be a good lesson for these people. They'd say, well, we better not do that because I could get arrested or put in jail. When Carlos Zapata had a restraining order against him, one of the rules of a restraining order is your weapons are removed. There was not one law enforcement agent in Shasta County who would serve him with the restraining order papers. The attorney who filed the suit, it was actually Nathan Pinckney, who I mentioned. This guy has just been targeted by so many people. And it isn't so much that all the sheriffs were on his side, all the deputies and law enforcement, but they're afraid. There are people in law enforcement here, we've written about some, who are white supremacists. You know, they have swastikas on their tattoos. And one of my staff says, I wish that we could see all the law enforcement with their shirts off to see what tattoos are under those uniforms, because you can't tell. So that's the fear factor. I know deputies who I think are good people, and they're afraid. That's what it comes down to. You know, fear is real.
As a member of the Fourth Estate, the press, what are your thoughts on what seems to be the undermining of the rule of law in Shasta County? I mean, the fact that justice has not moved at all, and you have been a victim of a physical assault.
Right.
And then you look at the fact that we have the former president, Donald Trump, who's running again, targeting Fani Willis, the district attorney in Georgia, coming up with a story that she was involved romantically with a defendant, a criminal defendant, trying to erode any credibility she has.
Right.
To make the process seem as political as possible. And then you have Ron DeSantis, who is also running for the Republican nomination, although his position in the polls seems to be shaky right now after that last debate. He's also attacked another Black woman in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
You had the state attorney who was elected, Monique Worrell of the 9th Judicial Circuit. He decided to halt the process from going forward so that she could take office, because he said that she neglected her duty to faithfully prosecute crime in her jurisdiction. Both of these men have purposefully targeted Black women who are in law enforcement and have intentionally tried to cast a cloud over their positions. What are your thoughts as a member of the Fourth Estate on not just your county's undermining of the rule of law, but the national attack against the rule of law when it comes down to national candidates for office?
Well, it's real, and it seems like there's no way to push back against it, because who are you going to complain to? Like, so if you're victimized or if you're doxxed, we had a gentleman, he's an elderly gentleman who used to be on the Board of Supervisors. He's a Republican, as a lot of these people are rational Republicans here pushing back. And he wrote a letter to the editor, which we published, about why Kevin Cry, the guy who's friends with Mike Lindell, should be recalled. There's a current recall attempt. He got up. When he was on the Board of Supervisors, he was the most eloquent, intelligent, civilized person. He just modeled that, you know, decorum was his thing. When he wrote that letter and he spoke at the supervisors meeting, since then, he has been attacked. People will come up during supervisors meeting. One woman got up and accused him of, just unspeakable things, sexual things, flat out lies. And our chair, Dictator Jones, is sitting up there, sitting on his gavel, smirking, and let this woman go on for 3 minutes. And then they repeat these, and they repeat the lies, just like examples we were talking about. And they laugh about it, and they say, hey, if you tell a lie long enough, the public will believe it. Just keep repeating the same thing long enough, and people will believe it. So honestly, during these meetings, when they're completely unhinged, you see, we have a county council. We're in our 3rd county council in 3 months. Okay. We can't keep people here. They either blackmail them into leaving, or they flat out make it so difficult and uncomfortable that they leave. And we have a new CEO. And I often will, during these meetings, when things that are happening that are flat out illegal and, slander, and I'm looking around the room like, who's going to stop this? Who's in charge of the people who are in charge? And so I think these people are emboldened. They truly feel like this is it's a revolutionary war kind of situation. It's civil war, and they feel righteous, like they're being, like God is on their side. These guys, one of the militia guys, his name is Richard Gallardo, he put out on Facebook this request, hey, Patriots, I need some people in downtown Reading who have property where I can post radio repeaters and antenna in case we have an emergency or we want to communicate. Well, downtown is where our county clerk office is. I really believe, and I feel sometimes like Chicken Little saying the sky is falling, and I've been saying this for years, but I really believe that these people are ready and willing to use weapons if they have to. You know, the National Guard would have to come in. And as a mom who had a son in the Marine Corps, you know, who joined when he was right out of high school, I think about how horrible it would be to have, you know, people from the National Guard who are practically teenagers up against these seasoned militia members who've been practicing. And I know they want Shasta County to be an example for the rest of the country. So it's really, really frightening as a journalist. And what I find too is the former paper where I worked, Record Searchlight, it was an award-winning paper. I was a columnist there, and I was there during the glory years from 1996 to 2007 when the recession hit. They don't have a building anymore. The press has been sold. They have an office. It's in downtown Reading in a little room. A news cafe has more staff than the newspaper. So what happens is that oftentimes they're not reporting on a lot of these things, like the meeting in Cottonwood on July 6th. I don't know. I doubt they get to choose their own stories. And so, you know, it's just not being reported. And so our TV station here, KRCR, is owned by Sinclair Broadcasting. So that's why I feel such a huge responsibility to keep reporting, because it's like a tree falling in the forest. If a meeting happens and they're planning civil war and nobody reports it, then the people aren't prepared. You know, who's going to sound the warning about what they're thinking, what they're planning? Of course, they go off, you know, a lot of things that they're talking about. God only knows what's happening behind closed doors in private meetings. But if it's a public meeting, I'm going to be there.
A news cafe, the news site that you run, has been a platform for documenting these political developments, as you alluded to. Could you talk about how the site's focus and content have evolved to address the changing dynamics in Shasta County?
Okay, Mike. So I'm more of a features writer. I'm not really a hard news writer, which is why if you read my story that I have today, I write the news, I write what happened, and I put in my opinion. Okay. And so I am more of an opinion writer, a feature writer. I used to run the food section at the Record Searchlight. So back when a news cafe started in 2007, I was doing a lot of recipes, a lot of, you know, slice of life stories, as the public calls it, human interest stories. And there were times when I would leave up the same story for a week, you know, because I knew not everybody logged on every day. And now since COVID, all the fat has been trimmed away. You know, we don't have an entertainment section anymore. I don't have a calendar for fun events anymore. I don't do press releases about, you know, some barbecue or something, because we need every inch of space, every pixel of space on a news cafe to be about this, what I consider life and death stuff happening here in Shasta County. And so a news cafe has 6 journalists, and 3 of us are more of the type that I am, more of a hybrid between writing news and opinion. And the other 3 are hardcore, straight down the middle news. You read it and you can't tell, you know, their opinion one way or another, which is the way I was trained. However, you know, the whole way of training journalists, that you should be balanced. You should be fair, of course, but balanced. And I decided about 2 years ago that I don't have to write a story and adhere to the both sidism of journalism. Now, you know, so now we have what this person said about having their tires slashed. And now I'm going to go to this militia member who thought slashing tires was great and get their opinion about it. I won't do it. I flat won't do it. And besides, these guys have such big mouths and big egos, and they're all over social media. And so what I've said for years, because we've been interviewed, we've had news here literally from all over the world, media. And a frequent question I'm asked by journalists is, well, why don't you interview Mark Kent and Carlos Zapata and Jesse Lane and those guys? And I say, one, I know that they're smart enough to be able to focus their answers into something that is not truthful. They'll form it, somehow make the militia sound like it's just like Neighborhood Watch or something. But also they have so much content online. We have memes. We have thousands of memes of their threats, their posts. So I don't have to interview them because I see the real them in social media. And it's just like, it's just like picking cherries off a tree. It's all there. It's all there. So I don't need to interview them. So that both sidism, the other three journalists who write more straight news, they do, they try really hard to be able to get a statement from the other side when they're writing a story. But sometimes it's difficult. We're so, reviled and hated by the alt-right groups here that nobody will talk to us. And that's one of the reasons they said they were throwing me out of the July 6th meeting, that a news cafe just publishes lies and, we're not fair. And so they're not going to, we twist the truth, things like that. So, I mean, in some ways, if you're the kind of journalist who these guys will talk to, I sometimes question what kind of journalist you are, because they don't want to talk to anybody who's going to print the truth about what they're doing and what they're saying.
You alluded to the importance of providing a balanced narrative, about balanced news. What are some of the strategies that you've employed to counteract the divisive narratives that are out there, primarily on the far right side, and provide a balanced perspective in your reporting?
I try really hard, and you're a writer, and so how sometimes you'll have sort of a little piece of a nugget of an idea, and it's rolling around in your head. It's like in a rock tumbler, and it's polishing it. And a column that's in my head that I haven't written yet is saying that a lot of these militia members who joined in the beginning, I think their motives were pure. They were, especially in the rural areas, they'll say, hey, if we dial 911, the sheriffs are spread so thin, nobody will come out here and help us. So we need to band together and protect ourselves. So, that's what they did. They want to protect their community and their families and their churches and their schools. And then, by the way, they have guns, because what if you encounter a bad guy? And I think in the beginning, and I know people who are in the militia, or who were in the militia before it got too extreme. And that's what they've explained to me. And I think that I would like to write something, maybe it's like a little peace offering, put up a white flag a little bit. Like, I know that all militia members are not created equally. I know that in some of these groups, there may be people who say, well, I'm staying here because of wanting to protect the community part. I don't necessarily agree with the, white supremacist Confederate flag guy who runs the barbershop, but I believe in protecting the community. I do believe they're good people who feel disenfranchised and are trying to protect themselves and their community. And so it's going to be difficult. I mean, I don't know if I can even find somebody who'd be willing to talk to me who fits that description, or somebody who was a former militia member. They kind of, I think there's this unspoken rule that you don't air dirty laundry. And if you're in the militia, well, they know the militia, what kind of ding dong is going to be quitting the militia and then speaking brazenly about what they know. That wouldn't be a very safe thing for them to do.
The recall election that took place in California recently, that resulted in the re-election of Governor Gavin Newsom, and the subsequent changes in county governance, were significant moments. How did you manage to capture both the political developments and the individual stories of those affected by these changes in your reporting?
Well, you have to understand, you probably know this, here in Shasta County, it is bleeding blood red, Republican. I mean, and it's getting more extreme. I think I forgot what, like 2/3 of the people here voted for Trump. So most of the people here hate Gavin Newsom. They call him New Scum. They have all these, names they call him. So the majority of people here in Shasta County voted to recall Gavin Newsom. And I think in some ways, I wonder, like, where is everybody? Where is the state to help us? I often wonder whether Gavin Newsom has bigger fish to fry than worrying about a little county with a bunch of crazy acting people. Most of them don't like him anyway. Most of them wanted him recalled anyway. And so he doesn't have time to help us or care about us. And during that time, interestingly enough, the alt-right here put the wheels in motion to recall one of the supervisors, which was kind of a moment when things flipped here. His name is Leonard Modi. He was a former police chief, a Reagan Republican. He was recalled by this group because they thought that he was a rhino. And so the recall attempt, and they succeeded, was based on, it was funded by Reverse Anselmo, the son of a billionaire, and the lies and the flyers and the commercials they would do, like this dark, make him look like he was evil. They'd put a rusty crown on his head, like he thought he was king. The lies they told, it was based entirely on lies, and he was recalled. And if I live to be 200, I will never, ever get over that, the injustice of that. And that's why I have strong feelings about recalls now, because what I know, I would go to rallies where you'd see people, the alt-right people with clipboards, walking up to someone when they're trying to get petitions to have it put on the ballot. They'll say, hey, are you upset about homelessness here in Shasta County? I sure am. Are you against kids having to wear masks in schools? I sure am. You know what? That's why we're getting rid of Leonard Modi. Sign here. And it was based on lies. None of those things, homelessness, kids wearing masks in schools, none of that was under the jurisdiction of Leonard Modi or the board members. But here, I coined another phrase. I call it duped and stupid put together. And they didn't investigate whether those statements were true. They believed it. It was sensational. It was like sharks and blood in the water. And he was recalled. And the moment he was recalled, and the person placed in his position was somebody funded by Reverse Anselmo. And actually, this guy's name is Tim Garman. And man, I just could barely look at him when I'd go to meetings, and I just kept thinking that Leonard Modi should be up there. And Tim Garman, actually, he wore a T-shirt to a supervisors meeting recently that said, recall Kevin Cry. So I got to say, and the day he did that, some of the extremist guys, the head of the state of Jefferson and one of the militia members, came right up to the dais and said, we're just chewing him out. And they were basically saying, hey, we gave you money so you could win this campaign. This is not the kind of behavior we expected. You know what we want from you, and you aren't doing it. So now Mary Rickert, the other sane Republican on the board, there are those two, and then the other three are hardcore extremists. So they win every vote. I mean, it's like Mary and Tim, they might as well just go out and file their nails and go to lunch or watch a movie, because it's almost like they're powerless, they're toothless. You know, they can make impassioned speeches about things. And the guys just sit there. And then when it comes to a vote, it's 3-2, 3-2, 3-2, 3-2. And so that's what this recall is about here that's happening with Kevin Cry. Unfortunately, it probably won't go, even if it was a special election, it won't go on a ballot until February, even March. And this guy has done so much damage in just since January when he took that seat that I shudder to think what will happen. You know what? I kind of have this crackpot theory that he would like to be recalled, because then he could be a martyr. You Google his name, Kevin Cry, Crye. He is going all up and down the state, speaking at places, freedom festivals. And I watched one video online of him speaking when they introduced him and he got on stage. This was in Fresno, the Fresno Freedom Festival. When he walked on stage, he was given a standing ovation before he opened his mouth and said one word. So this guy, I think he has an appetite for higher power, and he looks at Shasta County as, a small pond, and he thinks he's a bigger fish. So in my dreams, he just flat out quits before he's recalled, and because I don't think his ego could take it being recalled. So then he could quit and say, you know what, folks, I quit so I could go on and be more of an influencer in the rest of California and make change happen and help other counties get rid of their Dominion voting machines. I'm hoping he does. And then at the election, God help us, I hope there are sane, I'm a Democrat, and I'm just hoping there'll be some regular moderate Republican who will run for office and win, and to tip the balance back to a more sane board. And they can even hire back the health officer that was hired. In my dreams, Leonard Modi would come back and run for office, but I think he's so damaged and disillusioned. I think he feels like his community failed him, and it did.
Fox News reported that California Governor Gavin Newsom was trying to prevent former President Donald Trump from appearing on the state's ballot in 2024 as a candidate. Now, Newsom's office, of course, said that no such proposal exists and that the Democratic governor has not even floated such a notion. There are legal experts and liberal groups who are arguing that the 14th Amendment can be used to prevent Trump from appearing on California's ballot or any other state's ballot, because the 14th Amendment bars from office anyone who once took an oath to uphold the Constitution but then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against it. And a growing number of legal scholars say the post-Civil War clause applies to Trump after his role in trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election and encouraging his backers to storm the U.S. Capitol. If such a proposal were to be enacted and Trump's name does not show up on the ballot, what are your fears as a journalist after all that you've seen?
I can't even imagine. I think here in Shasta County, all hell would break loose. And I don't know what that would look like. But this, the people here, the extremists here, like I said, most of them are Trump supporters and backers. And so, oh my gosh, of course, I don't think Trump should be on the ballot. And actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking about our chair, Patrick Jones, who has breached the board chambers 3 times. Once was January 5th, by the way, the day before the insurgency at the Capitol. He actually took his key card, opened the board chambers, invited his extremists in. It was an unauthorized meeting. He's done that 3 times. He has broken his oath of office, and as have other of these members, numerous times. And actually, I think that should be grounds for them to be, not just unable to be on a ballot, but I think they should be removed from office. They're unfit to serve. They aren't following the rule of law. They aren't holding to the oaths they took. But it is the Wild West out here. Shasta County is probably the most Wild West place you could pick on the West Coast, because we are the perfect storm of all the money being, invested in these guys. The flip in Shasta County with sane people leaving and extremists flooding in, all these elected positions being filled by extremists, and then the moderate people being too afraid, not having a stomach for it or whatever, to not go there. Who wants to come home from work and then, change your clothes and go to a school board meeting where you're going to have these people attacking you? I don't think anybody will want to sign up for that. It would take a really, really strong person to do that.
So obviously, Miss Chamberlain, the challenges you faced are emblematic of broader issues within journalism today. How do you see the role of local journalism evolving in the face of increasing polarization and threats to press freedom?
Well, it's, I think journalists are going to have to be smarter, sneakier, more strategic about how they gather. I have hired moles to go in and record meetings for me where I knew that I couldn't go. And I have to change them out constantly. And actually, I have sort of a moral crisis even doing that, because what if they got hurt? What if they were discovered in one of these meetings right after the July 6th assault happened? I had many people contacting me, a lot of women, older women, saying, you know what, Doni, we're going to go with you to these meetings. We're going to join arms and we're going to be there and we're going to be like your bodyguards. And one guy he's a karate instructor, progressive guy. He was talking about coming and not being right by me like a bodyguard, but just in the crowd to watch to see if something would happen. But here's the deal. These guys, the people at these meetings, are all armed. And if something happened, and let's say this karate instructor stepped up to defend me, they just pull out a gun and shoot him. That's what I literally have nightmares about that. So what do you do? So I really have to sort of choose my battles sometimes, and I feel ashamed when I don't go someplace that I think I should. My family, my youngest son and my twin sister, they've often said to me, why do you do this? Are you trying to be a martyr? If you get yourself killed, then what? And I explained to them that everybody has a job they do, and I can be scared and brave at the same time. When I do Facebook Live, you asked about how I like means of protection. If I'm doing Facebook Live, I did that during the Carlos Zapata trial, where the Proud Boys were out front, literally Proud Boys in Redding, California, and the other media, I think it was mentioned way down low, like as a footnote. I put it front on in the story. To me, it was like the Ku Klux Klan, actually Ku Klux Klan sounds better, but Ku Klux Klan coming to town. So when I do Facebook Live during that period of time when the Proud Boys were there, I would get out of my car and I would park in a neighborhood that's near the courthouse. And actually it's a house that I grew up in. It was the house my mom died in. She died young. And just almost superstitious, I would park in front of the house. I'd think about my mom and strong women, and I'd start walking toward the courthouse. And as I got on the courthouse property, I'd turn on Facebook Live and I'd say, okay, you guys, it's a beautiful day in Redding. Just walk with me, okay? Let's just walk to the courthouse. And the reason I did that was that if something happened, if I was assaulted, then I'd have thousands of people watching Facebook Live and somebody could call 911. It's at that point, it was more about, honestly, it was more about protecting myself than giving information, because there's no information to be had between my car and inside a courtroom. It was just so that I would have witnesses if something should happen. So, I mean, it's these are uncharted waters right now. And I don't know, I have journalists who I've asked to write stories, or I'll pitch a story and they'll go, no, I can't do that kind of stuff anymore. I had a photographer, like a 6'3" photographer, this guy, and he went to one of the protests with me where the crowd turned on me and started yelling at me and calling me fake news and piece of shit and all American flags, of course. And after that event, he wrote me an email and said, I can't do this. He goes, I recognize somebody who's a neighbor in that group, and I didn't know that he was. And he goes, I'm afraid. And he said, and please, if you use my photos, don't put my name on them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So my last question for young people who are interested in journalism, in public service, in working for the government, whether it be on the state level or national level, but they are scared about all of the hostility, potential violence, and challenging environments that reporters like you have experienced and had to work with. What is your message to them as to why they should still pursue that career?
I can think of fewer, more noble callings than being a journalist, because without information, without the First Amendment working and functioning for all people, then we're doomed. But one thing I will say is I think people will often ask me, what can I do? What can I do? I'll bring you food. I don't need food. If more people flat out show up at meetings, I mean, like call their friends and say, you know what, we're going to go and take up an entire row, because it's kind of like wolves picking off a weak lamb from a flock. They can do that if there's just one little lamb out there all by itself. But if you have sheer numbers, I mean, they could stampede the wolves, but so what I'm saying is that I think the public, especially if they support journalists like me, I mean, I'm so grateful for their subscriptions. We're free. We don't charge, but people voluntarily give donations between $1.35 on up to higher numbers. But to those people who think that journalism is important and vital, then I would implore them, and young journalists even, to make sure that you don't go alone, that you have a buddy. And I think the whole, filming while you're someplace, especially live, is imperative, so that you do have a witness. It's a whole new situation. And maybe they have to kind of do it anonymously. Like, maybe they come in and they're not wearing, I do not wear a press pass anywhere. I don't need to, I'm known here, but don't make yourself look like a classic journalist with a press pass and big old camera around your neck, so you stick out and are targeted. You have to be a little more stealthy and use, cell phones and look like them. I'm basically saying you almost have to kind of go underground sometimes to be a journalist and do the work to get some of the really important stories.
Miss Chamberlain, I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion, and thank you for what you do and all of the risk that you take on as a journalist, and reporting the truth and reporting the news in spite of violence, in spite of threats, and to yourself and your family. Thank you. Thank you so much for all that you contribute.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on your very important program. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Chamberlain. Okay. With that being said, that concludes episode 117 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.